There was a lot of problems on it, because all of it was sort of groundbreaking.
It was Canon as well, so money arrived in suitcases.
A tremendous atmosphere working on a picture. I mean, half the crew was spaced out on coke and stuff like that because they were all into drugs. I think they'd been seduced by the life force.
But I shot forever. That was great too.
I was head of production here in London for Canon Films. Canon Films came to this country in 1982. They bought a chain of cinemas over here, and they brought me over here to run the show.
They were extraordinary in that they would set up these huge movies with enormous stars and just go on announcing them merrily. Nobody had any idea what film was being made next, which, where or what. You knew that if Cannes was coming up, you just sat and waited to try and guess what on earth might occur. They're extraordinary, and a huge number of movies got made.
I loved those guys because they didn't Menachem and Urim, because it wasn't just about making the money. They loved movies.
Golan and Globus, yes, in particularly Golan, he is a real filmmaker. He's a real filmmaker, and he doesn't care about money, and that's his fault. He has other faults, but this is one of them.
I got one of the biggest director deals through Canon that a director had gotten. There was a freedom to go make a film, make it as wild as I can, make it anything I wanted to make of it.
They bought the rights for Colin Wilson's Space Vampires. Then wrote the script and we decided to make the film. We started setting it up, chose the director, Toby Hooper. He has a talent for creating suspense. That's what I think he is. Very, very nice fellow. Got the actors, one by one, and we had to adjust a little bit the studios to accommodate the film, and it was quite an exciting picture, actually, a very exciting picture.
I mean, it was on such an epic scale, and kind of Quatermass-like, and what I was thinking, I want to make this big 70mm movie.
In that period of time, was it 83 or 84, this was one of the biggest pictures being made. I mean, it was, I was very privileged to be on it. It had an enormous, or considered then, enormous budget. It was, more or almost the same as the Bonds that I'd worked on. And, but we still spent all that money because it went on for so long. We probably didn't have enough to do it properly. And we didn't waste money. The money's all on the screen.
We mostly shot it in Elstree Studios, but not only in Elstree Studios, naturally around there. And it was a big film for makeup and prosthetics and this and that. It was a very, very big film.
Oh, boy.
At the time, remember, this studio had done Dark Crystal, returned to Oz, Never Say Never. Dream Child was going on in here. They'd done Star Wars, Indiana Jones Temple of Doom, and the original Raiders of the Lost Ark, all going on within a 3-4 year span. A lot was happening. It was rocking. It was really rocking. Flash Gordon had just kicked off down the road earlier on, prior to me, and that was a really cool time to be doing stuff, and people were really cutting their teeth on some cool movies.
I spent most of the time actually in the art department section rather than on set. What I was doing was simply scripting what was being come up with or conceived by these storyboard artists, particularly in the area affecting the special effects sections, because so when I read the script I could see why. The thing is, it was very loosely written and it hadn't been broken down into cinematic actual terms for storyboarding. So I agreed to go in and work with the storyboard artist, Terry Knight, who was absolutely brilliant. Lovely guy, but really superb. And he and I sort of locked ourselves away and spoke with Johnny Dykstra and the special effects guys, and even Nick Maley, and sort of came up with really all the effects stuff, which is all the outer space stuff, the big sequence with the bosses and all the riots and so on. Anything that involved that, we dealt with, and Terry would sort of draft it out and script it, come up with the shots and things, and I would transfer that into actual script form, so everybody had something to work from, and they could then break down and say, well, for this shot we need this, this and this, so we need to do part animation or part green screen and so on. So that's really what I was brought in to do.
It was not long after Flash Gordon that I got involved with LIFEFORCE. And we actually had the same team of people working on LIFEFORCE as we had on Flash Gordon. We had about a team of about 5 people.
I was aware that it was a big budget production and no expense was being spared on things like special effects and one thing and another, and pulling in the likes of John Dykstra, obviously, and people like that.
It was huge. The cast list was very impressive to start with, with Steve Railsbeck coming over from America with Toby. But then the rest of the cast was, the top English actors and actresses of the time.
I came along and I thought, what the hell do I wear for a space vampire movie? What the hell? So I thought, well, I know they'll cast me. They'll cast me for one of those space guys. That's sure that I'm gonna get. And so I met Tobe. He wasn't actually much taller than me, so I was rather happy about that. And he said, Mr. Morris, how lovely to see you. So, well, I'd like very much to have you in this movie, but I'm going to keep it all a surprise at the moment. Forgive my American accent. And I got back, and within 3 days, they said, Aubrey, you're not going to play what you think you were, one of those space people. You're not going to play any of those. You're going to play a British gentleman. I said, oh my God, what a change.
Dr. Hans Fodder, Sir Percy Heseltine, the Home Secretary.
You're just in time.
Toby Hooper at the time was not in the best of shape because he was mostly on drugs, but he's, I think, a very talented director.
A man of vision, I'd say. He's a very interesting chap, and looking back now, I'm just realising just how clever that man was, and how, what he had going on for effects. He had this incredibly interesting mind.
I liked him very much because you expect, Texas Chainsaw Massacre and this huge Texan to come out, and this demonic dwarf came out, and he's all kind of, bearded at the time. I guess he still is, and completely scurrying about, absolute mad hat.
He wore the same leather trousers. Well, now, let's get this right. He may have 2 pairs of leather trousers, but he always wore black leather trousers and a black jacket. He had a large cigar in one hand and a Dr. Pepper's in the other. And when one finished, there was a new one straight away. And I'm sure the budget for his cigar and Dr. Pepper's was almost as much as the movie.
I think he's a bit spaced out half the time, but whether he was sleeping badly or he got too much on his mind or too much caffeine, I think, basically the thing. He was very jumpy with caffeine.
It was so funny. I mean, I used to have the caravan, these caravans outside of the sound stages next to Toby's. You know, you could hear him go, running in saying, right, let's shoot. They said, no, Toby, we can't do that. And it's going to take like 3 hours to set this shot up.
Oh, shit. Well, here they are.
There's one little story I like to tell when they were final mixing. We were working in a weekend and a call came from the recording theatre. Oh, where's the noise of the Columbia docking onto the Churchill? I said, well, you wouldn't hear it. So they said, well, Tobe wants to hear it. And so I had a sound set up in the cutting room. I had a bottle of pop unopened. I put a microphone on that. And I had a wrench on top of the cupboard, drawer, a microphone in the drawer, and my second sound editor, I said, look, on the word 1, 2, 3, go. So the wrench, the door slamming, and the pop, and we were recording at 15 inches per second on analog sound. So we listened to it and we thought, well, it's got possibilities. So we reduced it to 7.5. Yeah, it's got possibilities. Reduced it again to 3 3/4. Okay, that's it. I sent it across to the theatre. Tobe was more than happy. Going to lunch, he said to me, Fodder, he said, that was a very good noise. How did you make it? I said, Tobe, if I told you, that the illusion would be absolutely shattered.
Stand by for soft dock.
Soft dock.
My meetings with Toby were quite few, really. I'd met him several times, bumping into him, really, in Canon offices. I mean, obviously I knew who he was, and he knew who I was, because Mark of the Devil had come out at Cannes with the scandal of Cannes only a few years before Texas Chainsaw did the same, you know. So we had that sort of thing in common. And we were courteous to each other and cordial and so on, but we didn't really spend time as such. He was busy anyway. He was obviously going to make the picture.
I mean, obviously, everybody knew about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and very much a cult film in its own right, but I didn't know much more than that until I met him on set, and he was a quiet, a little guy, very quiet, very methodical.
He did make some strange assignations towards his actors and expected them to do things that were highly dangerous, I would have thought. He sent us up in a helicopter, and we actors were all together spinning around, and we could hear this Tobe shouting at the captain, take it nearer to the front of the clock, take it nearer. And the captain said, my God, I don't know what I got as a man directing me, but we're all going to go down together if he doesn't shut up. So I can tell you from that point of view, he was courageous in his presentation, and but a bit tricksy here and there. All directors are, you know. You can't just say bad things about directors, because some of them have such wonderful things that they do and create that take away all the nasty things that happened the week before.
He was a nutcase. I mean, very interesting. Very weird film. A lot of stuff that was completely unusable to start with until he got into it, and then he reshot stuff. Certain things that were never in the film could never have been in the film, or certainly not in those days, because of censorship problems. I mean, Matilda May, when she came down the stairs the first time, I absolutely gasped. I'd never seen such a pornographic shot. Not for a commercial film in those days. That sort of thing was just never allowed. When I went to see Tobe in the morning after I'd seen Rushes, I said, Tobe, we're never going to get away with a censor with that. You've got to come and see it. So he came in, with his drinks in his hand and his cigar and his coughing and spluttering, and said, okay, well, we'll redo it. And the story was, was it makeup or hairdressing that would have to trim an enormous bikini type genital area of this lady, of Matilda, who was very beautiful. I mean, she was stunning.
We had this big discussion about Matilda May. He said, I want all her body hair off. And I said, you can't do that. You can't do that, Toby. She's a young girl. At the time she was 18. 90% of the film she was stark naked walking about. You cannot take all the body hair away. He said, right, I want the pubic hair as short as possible and lighten it up, because I don't really want to see it. So every morning I was on my knees, trimming and colouring and making it all look perfect. But we made him laugh one day because Matilda's stand-in didn't have the right length and colour of hair, because on big major films, obviously, the stars have a stand-in that do all the standing and waiting while the lighting man lights them and makes everything perfect. So Patricia, the hairdresser, had to buy a long wig and cut it. So we had a big pile of hair about 8 or 10 inches long, which we kept. And the day that Toby wanted to come and inspect Matilda, we laid all this hair on the floor and stood her in the middle. And we said, Toby, do you want to come in? And I said, have I cut it short enough for you, Toby? And all this black hair laid about on the floor, and he went, hoo, 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 and puffed on his cigar and went out. So it was one of the few times we had a laugh.
Matilda May, that plays the lead part over there, was a French actress, because we couldn't find an English actress that was willing to strip completely.
It was really tough because, I mean, it's totally nude, and so it was hard to find casting for it here in London. Although probably 20 or 30 actresses did screen tests for it.
Funny, I remember going down to one of the sets while they were interviewing the woman, the female vampire, and they just had the most gorgeous girls walking through laser beams.
There was a plane load of actresses from Germany that came over, and one of the actresses tried to sabotage the whole thing by eliminating all the competition, so it would just be her. And so, that didn't work out. But I kept hearing about this ballerina in Paris, and Matilda. And I said, well, bring Matilda over. And she was like 50 or 60 or the 70th screen test. And finally found her after months.
I said we found a young girl.
Girl? You mean human?
Definitely humanoid.
When I first saw her with nothing on, I thought, my God, this is the most fantastic looking person. She was very well cast for that. And she got into the mood of it very well, yeah.
She's a very, very charming lady, incredibly, I'd say, beautiful in a very intoxicating way. And yeah, she was just very charming. And she was good at what she did, very dedicated.
Matilda May was statuesque. The poor lady didn't speak any English at all. She was French. So we were sort of muttering to her in the pidgin French, try and get her to say, we take a break, we go, But she was sweet.
No, her English was quite good. She got on very well with myself and the hairdresser. She was actually made up by an older film makeup artist called Mickey Morris, and she didn't like Mickey very much. He was a very old man, and I think that there was no meeting of any sort. She was 18, very pretty little dancer from Paris, and he must have been nearly 70 when he did that movie. So most of her time she spent with myself and Pat Kirkman, the hairdresser, and we got on very, very well. She was a very nice girl. It was a huge film for her to do, and there weren't many other women in the film at all. There was one or two in the crew of the original spaceship, but once that had disappeared and we moved on in the story, there were no other women. So she was close to myself and Pat Kirkman.
I remember her being an awfully shy. We do very French, sort of hello, good morning, and vanished. And you never saw her all day. And if you did, she was naked and she was covered up. So she was very frightened and insisted only the director should be there, only the lighting person.
When poor Matilda went on set, I've never seen so many electricians and carpenters and everything else up in the gantry, desperately trying to get a glimpse of this, what was an absolutely perfect body. She had a super body. And you look up and you think, there's not supposed to be that many men up there, is there?
So on one occasion, one of the plasterers came up to me. He said, "Rog, if you come with me now, they're doing a scene with Matilda around on the next stage. We're not supposed to be there, but no, we'll be fine, okay." And the temptation to see a very attractive young lady in wearing very little was too much to resist, really.
In the end, we had to close the set because it just got ridiculous. There was more people up there than down on the floor,
She definitely left a spell on everybody that she met. In fact, I bumped into Patrick Stewart years later, and he said he bumped into her and that she was looking really cool. So, she still got it, obviously.
She was a dear girl. No wonder she was frightened, of course. And all those leering, beering men at her as she came down from space. Well.
Floor 9 to control. You'll never believe what I'm looking at.
All the other cast, I knew Nicholas Ball very well. We'd worked together before, and Frank Finlay.
I think Frank Finlay, well, he's just a natural actor with an enormous, commanding flair, charm, a lot of charm.
Stay where you are.
When they shot the Frank Finlay scene where he dies at the end, Nick Maley had been studying Thriller, Michael Jackson's Thriller. So he wanted to do something where the face bubbled at the end. So the day that we were going to shoot that, they got the 6 little Durex and stuck it on the actor's face and then put the prosthetics on top. And when they went to inflate the Durex, they'd used the wrong glue, so they had dissolved. So they had all the prosthetics to take off and new ones to put on with a different glue. And then, so it was maybe 7 or 8 o'clock at night by the time we got into the small studio to shoot that. And myself and Pat Kirkman were stood there, and we'd checked that Frank was all right, and he's knelt on the floor, and round him in a semicircle were 6 of the prosthetic team, each with their little blow tube connected to their own little Durex. And they start and they go down this tube, and something would flutter on his face. And Pat Kirkman and I daren't look at each other because we started to laugh and we started to giggle. And then Frank did the famous line of, "Here we go," or something. Oh, well, Pat and I slid down the wall. We were in hysterics.
Here I go.
Well, Steve was lovely. We used to sit and chat in between takes. He was a really nice guy. I think he missed home because, you know, it was nearly 6 months in shooting, so he got a bit homesick.
Steve Railsback, when to talk to him, was quite strange. I mean, he was a bit spaced out and very much into the character of this weirdo guy.
He kept retaining the atmosphere and the character right the way through the day with his performance. Now that's young actors usually do that. They try very, very hard to be in character. They do Konstantin Stanislavski acting, the important way of acting, but it is a way. But when you really know the secret, you should be able to go bing, bonk, and go on with it. And so there was Steve all tensed up all day. He must have been exhausted day after day. You'd say, "Steve," he'd say, "Just a minute, Aubrey." He was getting in the role, which is wonderful, really, because there are some great actors who maintain that is the way they work.
Something I want you to see, sir.
Peter Firth. Who could be nicer than Peter? And I've known him for years. And we managed to scramble beautiful scenes together.
What are you doing? Steve, where you are? He's sick! Samson, help us! I can't explain now!
Patrick Stewart was in it playing the psychiatrist, I think it was, yeah. And that was good as well. And you know, it's that kind of crazy stuff going on with him.
There's our killer, Sir Percy.
Patrick, well, he was rather grand, actually. Rather grand actor. You know, good old English stock sort of acting. Quite a sweet man.
Listen, you bitch. I'll keep you in the state for weeks if I have to. Now you talk to me.
I love you.
It was going to be only for 3 weeks. They ended up being for 3 months at Elstree, which was wonderful, and a huge soundstage. I mean, massive. All of that set where they float in and all of the sort of crystal thingies with the vampires in, that was all built.
The scene where Steve Railsback went into the ship that they found in the tail of the comet, and we had all the bones floating about. That was another one that it was very difficult to get it right. It took a long time. Plus the whole set was built up. You had to go up 3 ladders to get up into the set. So if they called for makeup, it was murder to get up and down.
But it was a massive set, huge, and all of the costumes and the spacesuits and the backpack things, they were 70 pounds they weighed.
The spacesuits were huge and very heavy. They had little air conditioning units in, but once the helmets went on and they actually started to film, of course the air conditioning had to go off, so they used to get very sweaty in there.
So it got hotter and hotter and hotter, and you're stuck up there, like for hours.
And those guys would hang up and, hang up there until they would throw up.
And they put us on Kirby wires, which is this little corset with 2 wires coming up from the hips, and then hoisted us up there, and that's how we floated about.
This is incredible. I hope you can appreciate the scale of this in the video.
The wire guys from Superman would float the actors in real spacesuits.
And of course, with Kirby wires, you've got a couple of guys on a crane idea with the wires hanging down, and each character that floats about in there has got these 2 guys on a crane, and that all had to work correctly, and not bang into each other and get tangled in the wires and all sorts of things.
It was very difficult to get four astronauts or 5 I mean, it's the best wire crew in the world, but if one of them starts to pendulum, then it sets up and sometimes it would take a day to get a few seconds of film.
When they were flying, they had the Kirby harnesses on, and they are the most uncomfortable things. Unless you're, like a top artist who's going to play Peter Pan and have it specially made and padded in all the right places. They're just standard harnesses that they strap you in, and it's very uncomfortable.
Quite painful. And then they'd sort of have a tea break, and we'd all be up there. Oi, oi! They'd say, oh, well, okay, we better bring them down again. Because it took about an hour to get everybody up there. And then to start shooting. I remember having my belt thing that they attach it to was written inside Christopher Reeve's Superman. So it was obviously his, It was kind of funny, it was good.
What are you gonna do?
You're going in. We're only gonna get one chance there, Rich.
The crew was immense because especially the prosthetics crew.
Nick Maley came looking for me, and he was looking for mould makers, which is what I was mostly doing at the time. Didn't even know what we were really in for. I mean, in those days, in the position I was in, I didn't have a script, I didn't know what the story was. My first experience was a guy walked in who said, I'm here to be life cast. And he was the guy that sits up and sucks all the life out of the doctor. And so we life cast him. That was the very first day, and we were straight on it.
The voices of the crumbling people, the life being taken out of them. Now you won't believe this, but I got a microphone, a couple of microphones up in my bedroom. I put an umbrella up, and I sat down. My wife must have thought I was going absolutely balmy, because I used to do a lot of these voiceovers in films. And I just made these noises with my throat, and I added pig squeals and yells, and it somehow it all seems to work. For me, it worked at the time. And the body, the woman that comes to life, the one they find in Hyde Park, all those noises, her on it, but it's absolutely my voice. Because they manufactured it a little bit, and it was great fun.
We were waiting for Billy Idol to live cast him as being one of the vampires. And I thought, oh crikey, Billy Idol, that's cool. And he didn't come. So apparently he couldn't get on the plane for some reason. Maybe he had a big party the night before. So Mick Jagger's brother, Chris Jagger, turned up, and he was great. So we did him instead.
Unlike the poor girl who did walk on set stark naked, Chris and the other guy were not allowed to. So the costume had to make them a little ball bag, to put it crudely. It was like the top of a pair of stockings. So that had to be stuck to the top of their pubic area, and the rest was hoiked up their derriere, and hoped it would stay there when they walked about.
During the preparation, taking body, making the bodies of people, we had a lot of funny things, like, I'm sorry to say, but one of them, when we put the gibs and everything on the person, it squeezed his balls. He was not terribly happy about it.
And we did interesting things. We were having, I think when she puts the knife in him in the church, it was a gelatin, we never do this now, a gelatin back, red jelly, and artwork skin, and a knife heated up. So when the knife went into the jelly, it melted it, and blood ran out. I mean, we just don't do that now. We had a sort of melting head with the sarcophagus as she appears in the helicopter. so many things. It just went on and on and on and on.
And we had giant miniatures and models.
We had the radio-controlled arm that went inside, grabbed his throat, whatever it was. But it did have a big street scene with a big lot of people, night shoots. Lots of people running around screaming. And zombies, another thing that Nick had was a van, which is also unheard of today, which was the mobile oven for the foams. So we had about 100 prosthetic pieces. If I remember rightly, I can say I'm wrong, and I think we had to duplicate them 5 times. And they were making 500, we made 500 moulds. And then he'd fill these moulds, he'd foam them, put them in plaster moulds, they go in the back of this ex-ambulance, I believe. And then they'd cook them there, and next day we'd open all the moulds up, get the pieces out, and a lot of them were then, instead of individually applied, they're actually, some of them were strung together as a mask, so they could just put them in one go onto people. It's an innovative way of doing it.
We stole a couple of the zombies. I had some photographs somewhere, but I can't remember. Couldn't find. And I stuck one of them on one of my work benches at a recorder, and people used to come into the cutting room. Yeah. And I drove one around in my passenger seat in the car for some time, but they were pretty mucky things, weren't they, John? Yeah, it's funny.
I've got mine in the cupboard at home.
And also the famous bat puppet that Nick's always going to be famous for. Very well done. I moulded that. Moulded a lot of good stuff. It was like the nursery ground for some of the best technicians that have done some of the best feature effects films to follow. Everything was quite new then. You know, this is all under Nick Maley's supervision. Nick Maley was kind of orchestrating all these experiments and what we were doing. So you're kind of doing it, but not really knowing the complete thing. I mean, a lot of people don't know what they're working on films until they go and see it.
We were working on huge, about 16 by 8 foot glass sheets on frames, covered in film, and using hand painting techniques and spray guns and so on. Obviously, I had a brief to work to, and we knew the theme, you know, the basic theme, this sort of phallic ship, and that's what we were working on, influenced obviously by Geiger, I have to say, but we were given a free rein. Nobody came along and said, oh, no, it's not like that, it's like something else. No, we were just allowed to get on with it, and we enjoyed ourselves producing these space monsters.
When I first turned up, I had no idea what to expect, really. I sort of walked onto this huge set and met Tom Adams, and he said, okay, what we've got here, we've got these huge glass screens with the this alien spaceship, which looked like a giant,
basically a giant dick sailing through the sky. The whole thing was a phallic thing and heavily sexual in concept. So in working on the spaceships, we took that on board, and in fact, you can see from the shape of the well, it was a giant penis, basically, we were making.
You can see it's a mixture of kind of anthropomorphic, biological bits and pieces, together with what could be doors, entrances, motor bits and pieces, pulsing. It's almost impossible to describe it, but it's basically, as you can see, all sorts of possible machinery bits going on. There's a little glass dome there, winding tubes, very biological, but the whole forming a long phallic spaceship.
It was a huge job, and Tom being an absolute sort of perfectionist, really, and a real stickler for detail, was wanting to get every little nuance and detail in this fantastic painting. And I turned up with my little airbrush, which is the size of a ballpoint pen, and thinking, well, I'm going to need something bigger than this to work on. For the next few months, that's basically what we did. We just worked on these giant screens, painting with acrylics and airbrush and inks and crayons and anything really to achieve the desired effect. It's just a shame really that when they actually made it onto the screen, they're all over and done in a flash. Really, you didn't really get to really appreciate them. But I guess that's the movie business.
This space shuttle that they built, which must be, well, about twice the size of a normal shuttle, but it was literally built on gimbals, which are like little ball bearings. So you could, rock it back and forward, which we used to do as we walked through it in this, exaggerated slow-mo fashion to give the impression of weightlessness. There were some lovely tricks in it, which sells you on the idea that we're weightless and all of that. And we had to do a whole set of, for every action there is a reaction in space. So if you take a step, you've got to push yourself back down again, when you're weightless. We practiced that a little bit. But, generally it was good fun.
Let's get the hell out of here.
I can remember one shot we were doing at Elstree in one of the stages there when they're going to blow up the inside of the spacecraft. And I'd heard about this was going to happen from the special effects guys. So I took my crew onto the back of the stage to just see, because this might be fun to see what happens. So we went over there and everybody pulled back to watch the shot, and it went off, and it was such a bang. The camera shot off its mounting and all shot into the back of the set. And all those are terribly expensive sets. But it's in the film, so it wasn't wasted. That was good fun. Oh, sorry, not fun. It was very creative art, Toby. Sorry.
I seem to remember there was a scene where there was mayhem on the underground and on a bus, with people with dead bodies and peering and so on, and dreadful things happening. And I think there was a fire scare. I have a feeling that things got a little bit out of hand, and we had to call in the fire. Some firefighters had to come and control what was going on.
Joe Hooper was rather like a pixie in a way. He would go around putting gunpowder here and there, blowing up all sorts of places, including me. I think actually Patrick Stewart blew up as well.
This sort of science fiction, and nobody really knew how it was going to go. Nobody had the slightest idea how they were going to shrivel up and how we were going to do it on film. Today it would be totally easy. I had Matthew Glenn with me as assistant, and who'd been with me for a while, and we were trying to, the first time when we were going to have the passage of the life force coming out of a body into the girl, we physically scratched the film, each frame by frame, which then put a sort of line to get an idea that something was happening, and then, by sound effects, which Vernon put on. But that became very important as to set it up, so that and then we were scratching. It took hours and hours scratching each frame to get this sort of coming out of one and into the other before, intercutting to get the shrivelly bits. Some of those look a bit pony today, but, in those days, it was a long time ago, it was state of the art. John Dykstra, when he copied or had ideas from what we had from the cutting rooms, a lot of things stem from the cutting rooms, because that's what people are going to see the first time.
Special effects were much more difficult to create at the time than now. We had the guy that was in charge of special effects was John Dykstra, who is a big shot now, a very big shot. in America. And it was, for me, it was terribly interesting how he created all those effects. Really, I mean, it was really fascinating.
Well, John set up shop here, and he brought a lot of optical equipment from the States. Finally, at Apogee, a lot of it was shot, like the laser beam refracting from out of mylar, you know, that twist light and to create the LIFEFORCE effect. But he tutored and helped create, you know, this kind of ILM-like or Apogee-like special effects team here.
John Dykstra had won an Oscar, I think, and he worked out of Industrial Light and Magic, which was and still is the most expensive, you know, digital effects company in the world, and the best, without a doubt. And John was breaking away from them.
He came in quite late on. We'd already been working on it for, I would guess, 2 or 3 months before he came from the States. We were working for ages on the mats, the concept paintings and the big glasses. And I have the feeling that although they were very pleased with what we were doing, they realized they wanted more than that. They wanted a little bit more, you know, modern technology. And that's why they brought in the American guys, and I think they used us, they used our work as inspiration rather than actual source material for filming.
A lot of John Dykstra stuff was added, all that sort of movement of which was done in Los Angeles. Later on, because we were running out of money and running out of time, and we were on the picture for a long time, and it was all down, like it often is today, waiting for digital effects to come in. Well, in those days there were film effects, which was much more difficult. And so I had Richard Hiscott with me as he was doing the optical effects with John Dykstra and creating the film from over here so that he could work with it. And Michael Kagan sent me to Los Angeles together with Richard Hiscott and Matt to just try and get this guy to finish it, otherwise I'm never going to finish the film. Vernon was still in England waiting for final digital or optical effects, as they were in those days, so that he could then put the sounds to it, because we were doing it in stereo. The way the editors worked in those days and today is that I was on the film from before the start. So we were continuously putting material together as soon as it was shot, as soon as we could get a sequence to shoot. And then Tobe, because it was on film, would then come and see it in the cutting room when he'd finished shooting. Not every day, but when he wanted to. And if there were any problems, you know, they could be sorted out. And if he didn't like something, or we hadn't got enough film for it, he would then get his other unit to go and reshoot those sections, which is, that's an expensive way of shooting, but it worked because we kept up as we were going along, and we had this film that was being created, was physically created as we went along each day.
I remember even that Toby asked for more days for shooting certain scenes, and he came to me and I said to him, listen, my friend, how many scenes do you think that you have to reshoot or shoot again? And I can't even remember the number. I think he said 20. I said to him, you have 5, choose the 5. That's we're shooting, and that's how to cut it off. And we did it. We did it.
It was a big project, and it got bigger and bigger. You know, I mean, I forget what the budget was, around 20 mil in the end. So, and it just kept getting larger and larger and larger.
The production overran, I think, on by some distance what it was supposed to be. So even from our point of view, where the work that we were doing was overrunning. I was only supposed to be there for, I don't know, a couple of months. Ended up working there 6 or 7 months, which I was more than happy to do. But I guess if that was extrapolated through the rest of the departments, you can see how something like that can overrun, and how the bills just add up on a horrendous scale. So yeah, there was a lot of money thrown at it, without a doubt.
When we delivered Tobe's version to Golan and Globus, which was his director's cut, and it had been dubbed, it was a little bit long, but it was a picture that worked. But the distributors, I don't know whether it's TriStar, they said the picture was too long and they wanted it shorter. And Tobe didn't want it shorter, because that was his right, because of the storytelling. So we tried to speed some of it up, which in space you can't, as we learnt on Moonraker, because it doesn't. Space is very slow. It was something which was trying to be more real, and certain slowness of it was rather, I mean, I'd been on 2001. I was an assistant, or I did sound on that. So I knew that, Kubrick wanted it slow, and I mean 2001 was extremely slow, but it was real, and that's what Tobe, I think, was feeling some of that as well. And certain things were done. We did it with sound sometimes to speed things up, which the docking and that. And then I was coming to the end of a period, because I had another picture to go to, and we'd been on it for, I don't know, a year, but I can't remember exactly what it was. And once we delivered the picture, and then I went onto the other picture I was going on to, and Golan and Globus called somebody else in, and they just slashed it. I say slashed it because they did, and moved it all around, and completely, from my point of view, and Tobe's, completely destroyed the picture.
When John left the film to go on Labyrinth, it left me in charge. I can't remember if I did the re-editing, I can't remember that. But we had the Canon people, Globus and Golan, in the cutting room. We had the boss of TriStar, and there's Tobe. Tobe was crying his eyes out for what they were doing to his film. He said, "Film, what are they doing to my film?" I said, "Well, there's nothing I can do about it. They're the governors." So then we spent about 3 weeks re-editing all the soundtracks, and there were a lot of tracks on that film. I mean, we were pushing in 30 and 40 tracks into the dubbing theatre, and they had to be all altered to the new edit. And the film, to me, was ruined.
What's the matter, Deverich? I don't know, Tom. I feel drained.
I'm only in the first sort of section of the movie, and there's a few flashbacks as you go through it. And that's the difference in the cuts as well, because the release cut, they do it in a quick flashback as he starts to tell the story, Steve Railsback. And but in the director's cut, that's done up front, so you know what the process was by the time they got to Earth, and they're all gone, of course. There's only the vamps left.
The original name of the picture was Space Vampires, which was, in those days, slightly tacky, a sort of rather cheap B movie, and they didn't want, it wasn't that sort of film. They wanted it to, so there was some ideas went around of what it should be, and the life force, which was part of the dialogue in the picture, that was the one that was chosen. I don't know who chose it. Probably Golan and Globus, I would think so, or whoever the distributors were.
Regretfully, the distribution company at the time was TriStar, and I think that they killed the film. They killed the film because because they came back over here after they had a test screening in New Jersey, if I'm not mistaken, and the reactions were not good. I think that they approached the wrong way. The fact that they changed it from space vampires to Life Force was the biggest mistake, because Space Vampires is a cult book and has followers. And when people come in and expecting Life Force, it's not Life Force, it's Space Vampires.
She did that.
The book is Space Vampires, which is exactly what it is. And it's a great book, because I'd read the book before I started the movie.
I thought it was probably a good idea, because I thought Space Vampires was a bit naff.
Yeah, this was given us as a present during the premiere. They were handed out as presents, I think.
Our jackets that we got at the end of the film said they were big black satin bomber jackets, very Tobe Hooper, with a big blazing star across the back with Space Vampires on it. So I was quite relieved when they changed the title. I thought it was a little more suitable.
We sat there, all of us. I remember Frank Finlay and Peter Firth. And we sat there thinking about it, and we were saying different names and terrible jokes, what we were going to call it. We're going to call it The World's Aglow and keep eating well and all these sort of things. So we had such terrible lines. And we thought if they really want this to be a classical film, we must make it rather posh, I suppose is the word. I don't know if Life Force is posh, but it is to do with life force and losing one's life and creating force to another. So that was valid, and I thought it was a very good title. I'm very glad that they used that title. So there.
I sympathize with your position, of course. However, I can tell you that it is a matter of national security.
I see.
I was asked if I wanted to have a credit. I said no, not really, because I hadn't really made any creative contribution to the picture as such. I mean, really all I was doing was what I call glorified secretarial work, in effect. It's like writing for a TV series, when you write professionals or those things. You're writing really what they want to their order.
It was one of those pictures which, I don't know, it was made by a group of people. The special effects team, the Tobe and his guy, Michael Kagan, trying to keep controls on the money, trying to stop spending it. Golan and Globus coming in and pulling out certain sections which they loved to show around the world to try and get some more money, which I imagine that's what their job was.
Whenever you did a Golan and Globus film, they were around. Not a lot while we were shooting that, but the whisper would go around, they're in town, they're on their way. But no, when you did a Canon film, you knew they were hovering somewhere.
When I first met them, they were two sort of gangsters. They were two of the old-fashioned film people.
You hardly ever saw them. I mean, I think they came down once, I don't know, maybe twice on Life Force, just to see some rushes or something when things had got a bit hectic, or a bit heavy, shall we say.
Golan and Globus were very, very much in the background. You didn't hear or see them. You practically didn't see them over here at all. They did come in and out, but if I can modestly say, I ran the show.
It was absolutely their biggest production. I can't think of anything else that would have gone even near it, actually, that they did. Because the money went on their stars, but that was it. But with Life Force, of course, because they were doing special effects and the whole thing, and it had big crowd scenes and so on, it was a major production. And it needed to go well. There was a lot resting on it, I think. And I suspect this is one reason why, when things were going wrong, or appearing to go wrong, I think why they held on to the package, come what may, because they didn't want to tarnish the image of it. As it happened, when it came out, it didn't perform. But then most of Cannon's films didn't perform either, so I don't think there was anything new to them. But it was definitely a heavy picture for them.
When it opened, finally, Eastwood's Pale Rider opened on the same week, and it actually knocked him off the top. So it sort of burst out well, and then it went.
Actually, for its period, it was a very good movie. I mean, really well done. I mean, today you'd have better. I mean, the transfer of the blood on the plane and stuff like that today looks horrendous. I mean, really not good. But the story was still quite good, still quite spooky, quite creepy. The person who made it for me was Henry Mancini, because working with him, it was such a privilege. Lovely, lovely man.
This driving score, which I love. I actually think that was one of Mancini's finest scores. And I was so thrilled that he did it. But in the ordinary release print, they only use the main theme for the end titles, which sort of doesn't give it the drive that it should have.
I think in some ways I was surprised it turned out as well as it did, because when I read the first screenplay, I actually said to Mike, I said, "But this isn't the script you're shooting, is it?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Oh, well, is it a spoof? Is it what is it?" He said, "No, it's a horror film." I said, "Yeah, but is it a kind of jokey?" He said, "No, it's a serious, real sci-fi horror film, like Alien." And I said, "Well, this script does not read like Alien at all." I said it had huge holes in it, and it didn't take very much just to know that, whatever it is, number 10 Downing Street is not right next to, etc., etc. I mean, the geography of London isn't that complicated. If it was a parody or a pastiche or something, it just seemed all very strange. And I couldn't tie down what kind of movie it was supposed to be. I never questioned that with Toby Hooper. He obviously, I assumed, had a very clear idea what he was going to do. He seemed to be getting a lot of zombies in there, and so I thought, oh, well, he's obviously doing his usual horror thing. And then, because of all the troubles that were going on, and I think they cut some stuff out because of presumably budgetary reasons and schedule reasons and things. It sort of dipped between being a zombie movie and a plague, like sort of instantly. And it started off as as this Alien, and it just moved around, which is why I think originally I'd assumed it was some sort of spoof or pastiche or parody or something, and it didn't really end up doing that either. But it has a kind of zest about it. I mean, I don't think you can ever say you'd be bored by it, which is the only cardinal rule, of course.
Sir, I think his neck is broken.
All the excitement of going into the theatre and see who was going to die next. And the gunpowder that Toby would like to blow us all up with. And I did explode rather well, having had an enormous head of myself made. And the scene in the cell, one of the particular actors who was quite superb.
When you work on a movie, it's very hard to judge because you don't necessarily see it progress as it should. You know, you shoot all the scenes in one set, and then you shoot all the scenes in another set, and then you go outside to locations and shoot. So it's not until you see something put together that you even think, oh, this is going to be wonderful, or this isn't. And it was a bit like that with LifeForce. It was, yes, we knew it was going to be something unusual, but I don't think anybody thought, oh, this is going to be great or this is going to be a flop. We'd all worked our socks off to try and make the very best piece of film. And, you know, just because the critics don't like it, in fact, sometimes if the critics don't like it, the public like it even more because they don't want to listen to what the critics say.
I'd have to say, our stuff I thought was quite good. You know, the visuals I thought were quite amazing. And of course, I think what makes it all good is Matilda May really walking about on that broken glass with no clothes on. I mean, that's a treat for anyone.
We really didn't feel that what we had done was given any. It wasn't used enough in the film, so we were a little bit pissed off by that. But I think we had fun. We enjoyed it, you know. But it wasn't a great film. We were certainly aware of that.
I think there were so many amazing effects, as far as we were concerned, with our creatures, with the vampires, that it stood the test of time in that way.
It just seemed to disappear into the ether, and you know, you'd say to somebody, "Oh yes, I worked on LifeForce," and they, "What? What's that?" So it is a bit of a surprise that now it's gained cult status, but you know that's the movie world.
Well, you know, films. You know, you do what you can do, and so many classic films were not classic film, didn't work in their times. And what I mean by that is that they didn't pull in the kind of box office that's expected. If the box office is coming in, well, the film itself just starts getting legendarily better then and there.
I'm not shocked, actually, because there are several movies that I've done in my lifetime that have, over the years, developed a genre and a style of their own. They're like wine and whiskey. They suddenly sort of mature. And I don't know how they mature. They mature somehow through word, through mouth, change of time, change of scene. The years between create different illusions. People see things very differently. And the young people, the younger, wonderful moviegoers, they love it.
It's now, yes, become cult. And I actually did you know, one of those shows where you walk about, you know, signing photographs for people in Birmingham. First time I've ever done one, convention. And the amount of people that came up about it brought posters for me to sign and things like that. Quite a few, you know, so I was impressed about that. So it obviously did make quite an impression on people, and since then has more so and more so. And now it is cult. You know, people love it.
That girl was no girl. She's totally alien to this planet and our life form, and totally dangerous.
Now she has clothes.